2 hit TV shows. Pretty big shows. Well, I guess you haven't heard that one. Anyway, it goes something like this.
Hello?
He was made for a sitcom. He was always the reactor. So how easy to step into a sitcom and just take these imaginary characters he's been listening to and write words for them.
Even though Bob started out as a stand-up, it's still acting. It's not joke-telling. He creates scenes, he creates situations.
Well, Mrs. Finley, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bill you for the cancellation unless you have a pretty darn good excuse. That's a pretty darn good excuse. What was it, a boy or girl?
What's different about Bob is Bob is a regular guy. He just happens to be a genius at being a regular guy.
You're the most memorable character I've ever met, but for the life of me, I can't remember why.
Everybody's had a salesman come to the door that's sort of like a Bob Newhart character. Everybody's been to a dentist or a shrink who has a piece of Bob Newhart.
Bye.
Bye, Dr. Hartley.
There's a lot more to Bob than in the characters he played, but I guess if you'll, in time, when we'll look at the body of the work, we'll have more clues as to more of who he is.
I'd like to start out by telling you a little about myself. I've made some guest appearances on television you may have seen, and 2 record albums you may have heard. Before that, I was a former accountant, and before that, a former child.
The oversimplistic view of the 50s, but it was somewhat accurate, is the African Americans were the musicians, the Italians were the singers, and the comics were Jews. And here comes this very waspy guy doing the opposite of everyone else, and brilliantly, and all of a sudden just owning a piece of comedy and comic geography that was never even there before.
It was kind of a new approach to humor at that time. There weren't many quiet comedians because vaudeville, you actually had to yell at people in the theater, and they got used to doing that.
Hey, what are you laughing at?
I'm laughing at the race.
What race?
The human race.
The human race?
Uh-huh.
What are you laughing at? You don't belong to it.
Most comedians in the 30s and the 40s and part of the 50s were, for the most part, trained in vaudeville. It's another kind of projection, another kind of education, or lack of same.
Right after World War II, comedy still was filled with one-liners.
I'm not well. I really am. I'm sick. I got to go back to my psychiatrist. I went to a psychiatrist 3 months ago, told him everything I know. Now he's doing my act at the Shapery in Chicago.
If you didn't like one joke, don't go anyplace, because another one was coming along right away.
He ain't doing so good with it either, I'll tell you that.
Comedy started changing a little bit, where it was more personality-driven, and some of it was political, some of it wasn't, but the style was definitely different.
Society itself had changed considerably after World War II.
It stood to reason that the newer comedians would be, if not street smarter, more intellectual, better educated. If you can equate change with revolution, it was a revolution, because it was a changing of the guard. The times got tougher and the jokes got tougher.
I'm not going to attack the Republicans because they're not united. Once they're united, I'm going to attack them. Just for this old time's sake, President Eisenhower has been hired by the American Broadcasting Company, a larger network than this, as a commentator. He's taken a sudden interest in politics and become...
Newhart packaged it differently than the others. He hit his targets hard, but they didn't even realize it.
See, Mayo, nobody can be popular over here unless he's big with the press. I got the sport pictures you said, but we couldn't use them, Mayo. But you see, what I described to you was how the president throws out the first ball at the opening of the baseball season. Yeah, but the picture of you firing the first shot with a firing squad...
Bob is not of the mold of the angst comedian complaining and angry at life. However, the material is targeted, absolutely targeted. Something's bugging him.
It was just our way of looking at life. But there was no cabal. I mean, we didn't all get together and say, look, we've got to change comedy. I mean, comedy is kind of subversive to begin with. You know, it's anti-establishment. The submarine commander routine of mine was a result of having been in service and seeing the inefficiencies of the military.
Looking back on the mutiny, I think a lot of the trouble there stemmed from the fact that you men weren't coming to me with your problems. As I explained to you before we started out, the door to my office is always open. I think you know why it's always open. That was stolen. I'd like that.
I guess if there's a thread running through all the routines, it would probably be the last sane man left in America. There's this man, me, who keeps looking at the world and saying, this is crazy.
At that time, Bob was not the kind of guy who was doing nightclub entertaining and going down, listen, from Saturday night I'm opening down here. That wasn't the case. He was just a funny guy in the office and was looking for a way out.
Bob was still living with his parents in Chicago, which probably contributed to his belief that, well, I'm not going to go anywhere. Here I am, an Irish son, almost 30. I'm still sitting at home living with my parents' place.
And there were times I thought I was crazy. There were times I thought, boy, you have really screwed up your life.
We thought of Bob as being a funny guy whose future was a little foggy.
They were getting married and raising families, and I was working at the unemployment office. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have been successful in comedy. I had to find out whether I would be.